This week's episode is supported by Investec Wealth and Investment UK. Are you one of millions being dragged into paying more tax? Will inflation deflate your future lifestyle? Know where life can take you with Investec Wealth and Investment UK. They can make sure you're making the most of all your allowances and reliefs with tailored solutions designed to make your money grow and a plan to help you pass it on. It pays to get advice. Discover how you can achieve financial freedom faster. Search Investec Wealth and Investment UK. It's important to remember with investments that your capital is at risk.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
It's the week ending Saturday the 3rd of February, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the jailing of former Pakistan PM Imran Khan, Nicola Sturgeon admitting errors in her handling of the COVID pandemic, and a deal paving the way for the return of power sharing in Northern Ireland. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Harriet Marsden, from Money Week, Mr. Guy Anker, and from Today in History with the Retrospectors, it's Arion McNicoll. Arion, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week we learnt the music industry's disappointing answer to Beyoncé's old question, who run the world?
The studio was owned by this older gentleman who wasn't very gentlemanly and thought that he could just free will and reign just without my permission and or consent, grab me, place me on his lap as we were listening back to the track. I went through something really unfortunate as an experience in 2015, which, really constitutes as a criminal offence. So it's a little bit triggering and difficult to talk about. And then furthermore, when you've signed these agreements with, doesn't matter whether it's a manager or a producer or whomever, 99% of the time they either involve confidentiality clauses or non-disclosure agreements.
Former X Factor contestant Katie Waisel speaking to Vanessa Feltz on Talk TV on Tuesday. And Arion, obviously she's had some very difficult personal experiences there, but this isn't about her personal experiences. This is about the music industry as a whole.
Yeah, this week a damning new report came out from the UK Women and Equalities Committee, which declared that the music industry is still a boys' club where both sexual harassment and abuse are rife. And this comes, they said, despite gradual and quite positive increases in representation across the industry. But the committee found that nevertheless, female artists are routinely undervalued and undermined. Now, of course, tragically, none of this may sound terribly surprising, but what is new is that the MPs sounded quite keen to step in and try to do something about it, because the report called for what they said was urgent action to tackle what they called the endemic misogyny faced by women in the music industry.
The thing is, though, harassment obviously is illegal. No one's going to say there should be more harassment in an industry, but it gets lumped together in reports like this, Harriet, with sexism. And you could say that sexism is the way the pop music industry has operated for so long, and profitably so. Still the case that marketing young women in particular using sexual marketing is its MO. That's a hard thing for the music industry to change. Do you think it's as damaging to be sexist as it is to have harassment?
I think it's a sliding scale. I don't think anyone's saying that sexism or using sexual attraction to sell records or to move in an industry is in any way comparable to sexual assault and harassment and rape that's also been documented in these reports. But I think what we're talking about is a wider landscape of power dynamic. And that does intersect with sexism and discrimination, and it's about who's making the decisions. And in that sense, although you can't legislate for sexism, and you definitely can't in the music industry, there are certain steps that could be taken. For example, one of the main things coming out of this report is the emphasis on how freelancers operate in the music industry. Like, for example, one of my closest friends is a freelance musician, and she has seen firsthand how sexism, it plays into how and why she gets booked. She's told that she won't be booked if she goes above a certain weight. She's told that she won't be booked if she gets above a certain age. The men making the decisions to book freelancers, by and large, it's an unregulated methods, and whether you're going to pay rent that month will largely depend on your relationships with the men who make the decisions in the industry. So in that sense, yes, it is sexism, and know that that is not nearly as bad as harassment or rape or assault, but it is all part of this wider problem, which is the power dynamic and the power structure that can be abused.
And even when you do get senior female executives, Guy, there's a pay gap problem as well.
Absolutely, and whether you're talking the music industry or anything else, there's a pay gap problem. I mean, data last year from the Office of National Statistics showed that in full-time positions, women are typically paid 7.7% less than their male counterparts. Again, that's across the entire economy. Part of that's obviously going to be, and this doesn't make it right, but it's going to be childbirth and the impacts there. But clearly, there are so many industries where we have major problems. And to your point, Olly, about sexism and harassment. I think within music, there's a third element to it as well, which is a lot of songs are about love and sex. That's fine for me. The other two are the problems. Harassment's clearly illegal. It should be stamped out wherever it is. The taking advantage of women, which does happen. You see lots of music videos, for example, words that none of us like. I'm not going to mention them, that you hear in lots of songs, quite recent songs as well. I think society's changing, and that element around taking advantage is changing, but nowhere near quick enough.
It was a bit of a jaw-dropper, Arion, to see this written in a parliamentary report. Quote, people in the industry who attend awards shows and parties currently do so sitting alongside sexual abusers who remain protected by the system and by colleagues.
Yeah, there was so much difficult to hear testimony from so many people, although even then, Caroline Noakes, the committee chair, told The Independent that they'd actually struggled to find artists who were prepared to speak out, mostly for fear of repercussions. And I think that there is a real issue here, that a lot of either the situations that are going on, and particularly harassment, but all sorts of other abuse within the industry, they're either not being reported because people are fearful for their jobs and livelihood in the way that Harriet was talking about earlier, or they are being reported and they're not being believed. Or there's a third issue, which is that actively these non-disclosure agreements get signed, which mean that women who are within the industry aren't able to talk about the things that have happened to them in the first place. And that is a thing that the committee was particularly keen to recommend on, which was some sort of limitation on the use of NDAs and finding other ways to make sure that reporting A, comes out, and B, is dealt with appropriately.
Harriet, what happened to Time's Up?
That's a really good question. I mean, what happened after any of these reports? What happened after the two NHS reports last year? We were just talking about the problems when even women who feel that they can't speak up is one thing, but even when they do, women are ignored or discriminated against or sometimes punished. I mean, the NHS report that came out in November said that the NHS had a culture of impunity for staff accused of sexual violence, and 91% of NHS workers in that survey said they experienced sexism. We've had similar reports out about what it's like for female politicians and all the Westminster scandals, and how actually female politicians, although they are massively at risk of sexual assault or harassment or violence from outside, they probably have more to fear from within Westminster. I mean, if we're talking about sitting next to the problem, you can look to our own government. I'm not saying that these reports don't make a difference. There's incalculable value to victims and to everyone else in the industry for feeling heard and for feeling listened to. And there's going to be probably more safety structures in place, maybe more public awareness, more open conversation, less stigma. But these reports, they come out, and these recommendations come out, and they come out against a landscape that is worsening. This is repeated quite a lot in news articles, but it's also worth repeating any number of times that in this country, rape is effectively decriminalized. Sexual assault and harassment, even more so.
Because it's hard to get a case into the courts.
Even if you report it, even if you go through reporting it to what have actually been found to be systemically sexist police forces, even if you do report it, and even if you take that risk of the repercussions to your career and the repercussions to your safety Most cases then are not prosecuted by the CPS, and even the ones that are prosecuted by the CPS, most of them do not result in a conviction. The chances, legal recourse in this country is a joke to women.
Except, I mean, all of that is granted, I understand. But the reason I asked about Time's Up in particular was because it was a Hollywood-focused thing that then, spread across the film industry around the world, which is very, very adjacent to the music industry.
Sure.
You're talking about showbiz in particular. How is it still the case that within, never mind the NHS and the police, within showbiz, it's still possible to have predatory men covering up their behaviour with NDAs in 2024?
In both cases, in Hollywood, in the film industry, and in the music industry, it all comes down to who has the power. And it doesn't matter how many female celebrities or film stars or musicians talk about these issues, and it doesn't matter how many big initiatives like Time's Up or reports like this one come out, the fact remains that the men at the record labels, the men at the studios, the men who actually have the power behind the purse strings to make the decisions, these men are still in power. These men, they're not changing. For a few high profile scalps, the entire system hasn't changed.
And is it also, I wonder, Guy, about the age disparity, in this particular industry of music, pop music I'm talking about here really, where there's this constant fresh supply of young people to be exploited? So even if you have a generation who are then more savvy to it, you have the next generation coming in the next year.
Quite possibly. But I also think to the point about the power disparity, I'm not sure age is necessarily the issue. You look at something like music, you've got well-known rappers, singers, very openly misogynistic in their lyrics. I said earlier I'm not going to say it, but you know what? I'll say it. I've got 99 problems, but my bitch ain't one. I've got hoes and different area codes. Do you know what I mean? I mean, lots of us know those. They're very famous songs, those.
Not in that accent.
Yeah, you don't want to get me rapping, trust me.
You're bringing your own style.
But my point is, this is coming from the people right at the top. The stars. Eminem has been accused of it. 50 Cent has been accused of it.
Yeah, but hold on. I mean, your references are the references of someone of your age and background, Guy. But I mean, there are women coming through, aren't there? Young women who talk to young women who talk about sexual harassment. Artists like Ray, Taylor Swift. It's not as if there aren't women also making a stand against misogyny in music.
Absolutely. But my point is that there's an obvious power disparity whereby in the music industry, the people in power aren't just the producers. It's not just the Harvey Weinstein equivalents in music. It's the stars themselves. If the stars are coming out with those sorts of lyrics, it's obviously going to exacerbate the culture. But I would say, I think the music industry is particularly vulnerable because of the nature of the lyrics and because of the nature of, what goes on late nights, etc. But we have this isn't just a music conversation, as Harriet's rightly talking about the NHS and other industries. I recently went to an awards do in my industry, personal finance journalism, completely fine, nothing untoward happened as far as I know. But the organisers were compelled to send out beforehand a list of behaviours that are unacceptable. I probably don't need to spell them out, that are pretty obvious. But it's incredible that such a communication has to be sent out for what should be a fairly non-event in the sense of misogyny.
But it's that kind of positive action, isn't it, that maybe makes change happen, Arion? I mean, I was on the train into London yesterday and I saw a big billboard telling people not to do upskirting. Again, that seemed to me to be A, common sense, and B, illegal. But it was spelling out to passengers on the train, putting your phone up someone's skirt and taking a photo is illegal and is sexual harassment and will not be tolerated.
It hasn't been illegal for very long, though.
It hasn't. And did it need spelling out to that audience? Does putting that sign up for every person who says, this is crazy, I don't need to be told this, does it stop one person from committing a crime?
I think that's the hope of moments like this, which Harriet's right is certainly, a thing that happens from time to time, that we hear from a parliamentary committee and they have all sorts of recommendations and they, project forward to the possibility of legislation. And on one level, until we see that legislation, then nothing is necessarily going to change in concrete terms. But on the other hand, it's important to have these moments just to hear from some of the people within industries like this that this sort of thing really is going on and it's important to pay attention to. And not only that, but there are people in power who are listening to them and intending to do something about it. Now, we do have to wait and see if those things carry through and we do get the new laws that are promised, but at least this is a hopeful moment.
Yes, I suppose that is a good news spin on it, isn't it, Harriet? It's depressing that the report says this sort of thing is still going on. and actually, let's be honest, is probably also in the music industry going on with young boys as well. But the fact that there is a report called the Misogyny in Music Report and it's being done by a parliamentary committee is in itself at least authorities trying to pay attention to the issue.
Sorry if this sounds really cynical, but if you're asking me, do I think that it's going to lead to any kind of tangible difference in the music industry, I'm going to have to say no. You know, you talk about the upskirting posters on the tube. Do you think that they make a difference? Do you think that the knowledge that rape or sexual assault or harassment or abuse are illegal, do you think they make a difference? Are we seeing these rates drop? Is the gender pay gap getting smaller? No. All of these reports come out and all of these initiatives take place, and all these, like Sadiq Khan's ridiculous Say Mate to a Mate campaign last year. I mean, do you think that they actually change things?
Well, what has changed is we're talking about it, because we wouldn't be having the conversation 10 years ago.
We're talking about it, but do you think that we're probably going to be talking about it again in 10 years? I'm finding it hard to see the good news lining of this. And I do agree with Arion, and I think it's really worth saying that the value to victims and the value to people in the industry of being heard is really, 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 really huge. I think that that's really important to say. I'm not trying to detract from the importance of these reports and this research and these recommendations. What I'm saying is we have had so many similar reports, and we've had so many similar charitable initiatives and policy initiatives and legal initiatives, and what are we left with? Where are we now? You mentioned that the new generation, we're talking about this, and a new generation might be more savvy to these problems. A poll came out today to show that men and boys aged between 16 and 29 in the UK believe it is harder to be a man than to be a woman, and 16% thought feminism had done more harm than good, compared with 13% among the over 60s. That suggests to me that the problem is getting worse. I mean, misogyny in schools and incel culture and fandom of Andrew Tate is on the rise among young men. These problems, they are not getting better, they're getting worse.
And there was an amazing detail, Arion, again, which sort of made my jaw hang open, because you sort of, I mean, it's awful, but you sort of expect there to be sexism within pop music. I was staggered to see it being reported in classical music conservatoires as well. Just tell us about that briefly before we move on.
Oh, yeah, that music academies and conservatoires were found to have been encouraging women away from, inverted commas, masculine instruments, which they said included drums and the trumpet. It was funny that the Times chose to lead on that as their take on this whole story, which was amusing in its own right. But I think there are so many aspects of sexism that touch the industry, and Harriet, you're not wrong that things are changing oh so slowly. There was another tidbit that I found, which was that back in 2021, it was announced that, again, not so shockingly, only 23% of Grammy nominees were people who identified as women. That was 198 nominees out of the 853 across all of the categories. And the Recording Academy immediately promised to do something about it. And so 2 years later, in 2023, that number went up from 23% of Grammy nominees identifying as women to 24%. So you're right. Things are changing very, very slowly indeed.
Harriet.
I think one thing that we haven't discussed, and when we're talking about the overall trend of whether things are getting better or worse, one of the main things that has changed in all industries, but particularly the music industry over the past 10 to 20 years, is the rise of social media, and how much easier that has made for female musicians to be targeted, doxxed, harassed, abused online. So in that sense, one major aspect of technological advancement and culture over the past 2 decades has actually led to a situation where everything for women in every industry is worse.
Well, as the powerful male gatekeeper here, I'm going to move us on. Harriet, you're up next after this. This week's episode is supported by Investec Wealth and Investment UK. Are you one of millions being dragged into paying more tax? Will inflation deflate your future lifestyle? Know where life can take you with Investec Wealth and Investment UK. They can make sure you're making the most of all your allowances and reliefs with tailored solutions designed to make your money grow and a plan to help you pass it on. It pays to get advice. Discover how you can achieve financial freedom faster. Search Investec Wealth and Investment UK. It's important to remember with investments that your capital is at risk.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can Do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can Do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
Harriet, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is it schools out for London's children?
One of the great things about London, while it is a thriving metropolis city, it has also got some fantastic neighborhoods for families. Whether you're just getting started or thinking about that long-term options, let's highlight some great options for you. Let's highlight Richmond in Southwest London, a fantastic leafy area that is so great for families. From transport perspective, you can get there on the District Line or overground stations, and there are fantastic buses that'll connect you to Heathrow, Twickenham, Hounslow, wherever you need to get to.
I've never heard Hounslow said so beautifully. I want more. Hugo Arinze on YouTube in her video, Family Friendly London, Where to Live for Parks, Schools and Community. What's this story, Harriet? What's happened this week?
Well, new research by the London councils came out that showed that an increasing number of schools are being forced to close amid this exodus of families from the capital. And almost 8,000 fewer children will need places over the next 4 years, according to this research. 4,000 fewer in secondary school and about 4,000 fewer in reception. That's a drop of demand of about 4.3 to 4.4% respectively. And that's much higher than the predicted drop last year, which was about 3.5%. Basically, it's a confluence of all the major issues that are affecting the country, which is falling birth rate, the pandemic, the effects of the pandemic, Brexit, and also the housing crisis.
Guy, this could be seen as good news, couldn't it? I thought parents wanted class sizes to be smaller.
Yes, but not if the school closes down, of course. You want the smallest class size you can get so your kids have the most attention. But if there's no school, you've got a problem.
And why? Just explain why the schools would be in danger of closing down just because they lose a percentage of pupils.
You know, in very simple terms, the fewer pupils they have, they're simply not going to get the funding that they need.
So the budget's calculated per student.
Yes, and also you just get the overall critical mass. You know, every organisation, every council, every government agency has to make investment decisions. You're going to put your money where it's needed the most. Very interesting what Harriet says about the reasons behind it. I would certainly bias the cost side because, of course, falling birth rates affect everybody. This is a worldwide problem across Europe, across the Americas, etc. But the cost of living is such a problem in major cities. And if you take London as an example, I'm just going to take the most recent nationwide house price index where it broke out regional house prices. The average house price in London, £500,000. The average house price in the areas immediately around London, £400,000. Now, £400,000 is still a lot of money, clearly. But you can immediately see the difference. And it's not just the price of housing, of course. It's the price of going out. It's the price of services. It costs so much more in London compared to outer Londons, and that pattern is replicated in other metropolises, of course, across the UK. That is such a major driver. Now, of course, the pandemic led to an escape to the countryside. People wanted more space, although what we are seeing is stats saying some of those people are coming back in. But, I'm biased because I talk about money for a living. But
you're also a Londoner with children.
I am, and I was going to come on to that as well. But I will naturally bias, that's my subconscious bias, to talk about money, but I do think it plays such a big part. And to your point, Olly, yes, I'm actually in this position right now. I'm a Londoner, as you say. I live in Zone 2. We want a bigger place. We can't afford a bigger place in Zone 2, Zone 3, Zone 4, Zone 5, Zone 6. So we're going to, in the next couple of years, move out. We've got a 1-year-old. I'm going to be part of that exodus, probably, unless I win the lottery. And it's the cost of living. It's that simple.
And is that going to put strain, actually, ultimately, people like you doing that as this trend continues, on the schools wherever you move to, in the home counties or wherever?
I'm sure it will. And, you kind of have a bit of a ripple effect. And you even see it within London. In the 80s, Notting Hill was not the most desirable area to live in London. Boy, is it desirable now. But the ripple of that means, for those who know London, it means places such as Ladbroke Grove, the next area, Kensal Rise, the next bit, Willesden, Harlesden, you get this ripple where people just move progressively out, but then those new places, they get expensive, so people move out further and the ripple goes on.
Okay, but when you look at it like that, Arion, then it just sounds like the byproduct of capitalism and almost inevitable. Like if it wouldn't be happening to London, it would be happening somewhere else. It's a trend. Does it matter?
I suppose it matters in two ways. First of all, if you care about the nature of London and its health, you kind of do need people of all ages and demographics to make it the city that it always has been. I think also in terms of the education that's being offered there, even shy of schools closing, once schools start to lose money, it means a narrowing of their curriculum. It also means that they can offer fewer after-school clubs, and they're forced to reduce the number of teaching and support staff. So altogether, you're getting this lower quality of education in the nation's capital, which itself is something to be, particularly nervous about. But also the loss of these schools. Last year, Lambeth announced that a secondary school that was founded in 1685 was set to close for good, and the students were then farmed out elsewhere. And what happens to those fantastic pieces of public property? Well, they get snatched up by developers and generally turned into lovely and usually unaffordable housing that then the next generation lives in briefly before they too get shunted out to the next neighbourhood. So altogether, yes, this ripple effect has a negative impact on the individuals' lives who are being shunted out, but also on the city itself. You want a thriving metropolis that's got lots to offer.
Do you, Harriet? Is that why you've chosen this as your story of the week? Because you're a Londoner too.
I am. And actually, I think that Arion was talking about Archbishop Tennyson's school in Oval, which is just around the corner from me. And there was such a devastating impact on the community because parents were given like a couple of months to find new school places for their children, many of whom were in the middle of a 2-year GCSE course. So there is a real human impact here on families, on education, on stress levels. That I don't think that we should downplay. And there is a huge impact on the kind of culture of the city. I mean, if children are going to disappear from London, do playgrounds disappear? Does the Natural History Museum disappear? Do any children's services, unaffordable childcare, does that disappear? But the reason that I picked this story is because I think that the impact goes far beyond the capital. I think that the capital is an absolute confluence of all these issues facing the country, and I think that they're all exacerbated in London for reasons we've discussed, like Guy outlined very well, the cost of things here. But I think that if you think about the future of the country and of the demographic makeup of the country, what happens when there's no more young people in the city? What is the impact on the arts industry, which is primarily located in London, that makes a fortune for the country? What's the impact on the financial, on the city, on politics, on any number of industries that are concentrated in the capital when families leave? If London becomes a working metropolis and children disappear from the city, that has huge implications for the entire country.
And does it require some sort of government intervention to stop that happening, Guy? Because councils are really stretched, aren't they, in terms of their budgets? There's only so much they can do, and if schools are declining in population, they're going to carry on with the rubric of decreasing the funding. But should the government step in and say, it's important you have a school and we're going to make sure it stays open?
In a perfect world, absolutely. But we're also hearing about local authorities and councils that are bankrupt and just simply don't have the money. So to answer your question, yes, because those local authorities, they're stuck as well for various reasons. So absolutely, to solve the funding problem, the government clearly needs to do something. But I think it's a really good point around, if we do have an exodus of young people, obviously children originally, and that becomes over time that becomes an exodus of young people. You do face the ripple effect again of what that does for industry in those areas that they're left behind. Now, I don't think London's about to get left behind. Let's be really clear here. London is a very, very attractive city to people all over the world. One of the reasons why house prices are so expensive is because people from all over the world look to buy here, whether that's for investment purposes or whether that's to live here. So listen, I'm not going to start talking about the doom and gloom and downfall of London. I don't think that's going to happen. But I think there is a risk, maybe in localised places, people potentially in 15, 20 years won't have the opportunities they have today in that localised area, because maybe there isn't the industry in that area because there just aren't the younger people. That's probably a doomsday scenario, and it's a risk rather than, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's a risk we need to be aware of.
There's also a sense, it seems to me, Harriet, that demographically, London has already changed away from older people. I think this quite a lot when I visit, because I don't live too far away from the city, that you just don't see anyone over 55, 60 as you go about your daily life in London. And it's because they're all out in the suburbs. They're not there. They're not in the centre of town anymore. You just don't see them.
Yeah, I think I don't have the stats for the kind of what age most people are living in London now, but I do know that the amount of households with a dependent child in them has just plummeted over the last few years. And that obviously will have implications for older people as well, because their families will effectively be leaving or priced out for whatever reason. And I think that Guy's right that London will not cease to be an attractive place to buy property, but it's about who's buying the property. I mean, so many people are buying London properties from abroad, using it as investment properties. It's a money making. It's a place to put your money. It's not necessarily a place to raise your family, and it's sucking the life out of the city in so many ways. So I actually live just across from a school. I can actually see the school looking out of my window right now. And the bells ring at 3:30 or whatever it is, and the kids all stream out, and it's filled with the sound of children in the playground. And when the first lockdown happened in 2020, that was the first noise that just disappeared. It just stopped. And it was kind of like the noise of the planes. I didn't realize it was there until it stopped. And then it's all I heard was the absence of children. And it really got me thinking about like where all this is going. And I always go back to this film, this 2006 film, The Children of Men, which was based on a 1992 novel. It was about a dystopian...
When you say you always go back.
Just thinking about, because it's a 2006 film, but it's based on a 1992 novel, and it's actually set in 2027. And it's this dystopian future of the UK where after 18 years of human infertility and global warfare, and the UK has become a police state where immigrants are arrested and imprisoned. And there's this really powerful bit in the movie where one of the characters said, as the sound of the playgrounds faded, the despair set in. Very odd what happens in a world without children's voices.
You're nodding, Arion, but it's worth saying you've literally flown to the other side of the world to prevent bringing your children up in London.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I'm now coming to you from Australia for this very reason, in part, which was the same conundrum that everyone faces, that Guy, you say you're on the cusp of as well, which is how can you continue to live in a place where you don't have enough space to raise your children? But we've been talking about this as a very specifically London story, but actually I found this feature from Vox, which showed that in the 21st century, the number of families with children has shrunk in high-density urban areas all around the US, while simultaneously the number of childless college graduates, predominantly white, has in their place moved in. And I think that's the story that we're talking about as well, that we're turning these metropolises of ours into comparatively monochrome places where previously they've had a greater amount of age groups and colours and demographics and backgrounds. And I think that is really important. And it's not just London, it's happening kind of simultaneously everywhere.
Yes, and Harriet, it becomes self-perpetuating, doesn't it? Because then when the council are looking at their budgets, it's not just about schools anymore. They're saying, well, why are we investing in a playground? We need a care home, not a playground. Yeah,
and I mean, now with council, as we've mentioned, with budgets, so many councils facing bankruptcy, most councils are having to prioritise these services that are absolutely essential. So things like playgrounds, things like swimming pools, things like local outreach, all of that disappears, and it makes everyone's lives just a little bit more bleak. I also think, like, in terms of changing demographic of London, I disagree with, I think, the implication that London would be becoming less diverse and more monochrome, because I don't think that's the case. But I mean, I'm a good test case for this, right? I'm 31 years old. I am on an average UK salary. I've lived in London my whole life. This is my home. If I wanted to have a child, I would have to leave my home. I would have to leave where I grew up. I would have to leave where my parents are, where they need a lot of help, where my grandfather still lives. I would have to leave my home in order to have children. That's the choice that I, as a person who has got so much privilege in so many ways compared to most people in the capital, that's the choice that I face. So where does that leave us as a society?
I think Harriet's just summed it up. It comes down to cost. Right across Europe and North America and other parts of the world, living in metropolitan areas is very, very expensive, and people on good salaries in jobs with great career prospects, still can't afford adequate housing, have to make decisions about whether to have a child at all, or maybe one instead of two. It's one of the reasons why the birth rate has dropped so much. You know, in the 60s, you're looking at 2.5 children per household typically. Now it's about 1.5. And a key reason for that is the cost of living. I said my bias is money, but I think it's for good reason as well. So much of this comes down to the fact it's so expensive to live wherever you are in Europe, in Australia, in America, and in so many other places in the world.
OK, before that bell rings and the children come running out of the playground, let's move on. Guy, you're up next after this. You're finishing the show, Guy. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is being a multi-million-pound football manager a recipe for unhappiness?
Yeah, we cannot compare the pressure we have in England and in Spain, from my experience.
Why?
It's 1,000 times higher and tougher there than here. Here is, for the managers, is a real place to be. Of course, a lot of games and 6 press conferences a week and every 3 days game is a lot, but the pressure you feel in Barcelona is not comparable for another club.
Do you feel any sympathy towards Xavi?
Yeah, of course, I understand completely.
Man City manager Pep Guardiola there speaking at a press conference on Tuesday, but talking about Barcelona, Guy. Why? What's happened this week?
Yeah, so, I mean, Pep knows all about this. He used to manage Barcelona. Their current manager, Xavi, who's a Barcelona legend as a player, he won 25 trophies at the club. He announced at the weekend that he was going to leave at the end of the season. It was very interesting, his reasons. He cited being undervalued. He cited that he suffered mentally. And he actually said after the initial announcement, he felt liberated that he'd made the announcement. And it's very interesting because it comes shortly after Jurgen Klopp said he was going to leave Liverpool at the end of the season. He cited not having the energy to do the job. We've had Arsene Wenger, the former Arsenal manager, previously talk about one of his greatest regrets being the commitment he showed to the club meant he just wasn't there for his daughter growing up, and he really felt that it impacted his family life. So I thought this is a very interesting story on that clash between. There'll be some people say that these are multi-million-pound managers, deal with it. But actually, the impact having such a high-pressure job has on you mentally and ultimately how it impacts your family and your happiness.
Well, there we are, Harriet. I mean, we were talking in our opening story, weren't we, about men on huge salaries, manipulating an industry to their advantage and the detriment of everyone else. But here we're talking about let's have sympathy for all these men that have such a hard job. Where do you stand on that?
I would say I have a huge amount of sympathy for football managers. Honestly, I do. And I say that with no irony. I think it's an absolutely thankless task. I think it's demanding to a degree that we can't possibly imagine. I mean, just the training schedules alone, the match schedules, the leagues, the international championships, like the domestic cups, the football schedule, just as a general side point, is out of control. But I feel intense amount of sympathy for Xavi, for Pep, for Jurgen Klopp. I'm devastated about Jurgen Klopp leaving. I think it's a really, really sad loss. And I think it's really brave of him to come out and say what he said, saying that he was running out of energy and his resources were finite. And he said, I can't do it on 3 wheels.
But the resources aren't finite, are there, Arion? As we're saying, there's huge amounts of money. That's what I don't understand. Get an assistant then. Why is that difficult? People run bigger businesses even than football clubs, and they're not leaving because they can't handle it.
Well, I think because even more than the intensely demanding schedule, it's the pressure that's coming from every possible quarter in the direction often of the manager. There's such huge expectation, particularly at the big clubs, and arguably Barcelona is right up there with the very best of them. But you think about, Xavi's performance at Barcelona, in his first season, he steered them from 9th to 2nd place. And then in his second season, he actually managed to win La Liga by 10 points. He also won the Supercopa. And, simultaneously, then this season, the performance has been slightly underwhelming, and it's that has prompted him to get to this point of speaking publicly in this incredibly sort of sad way. He said, it's a cruel and unpleasant job, describing it. He said, it makes you feel worthless on a daily basis. And I think it's arguable quite how much money you would have to be paid to feel worthless on a daily basis, but maybe there's no amount. Certainly he seems to be saying there's no amount that could be paid to him to be made to feel that way.
Is it an industry-wide problem, Guy, though, as you're suggesting, or is there something particular about managing Barcelona? I mean, we were hearing there in that clip from Guardiola essentially saying Man City's a breeze compared to Barcelona. So, I mean, is it actually just a problem with the fans in Barcelona specifically who make your life a misery, or is it broader?
I think it's broader, but I think there's certain clubs where it's more intense. But Barcelona, Real Madrid, it is intense. In Italy, it's very interesting. When you often see images of fans attacking training grounds in some Italian clubs when things aren't going very well. I think Pep Guardiola is right in the Premier League. While it's incredibly stressful and a lot of pressure, they probably don't have those pressures. But I actually just want to take a step back again, a bit like the music point. And I just want to tell a story. About 13 years ago, the Lloyds Banking Group CEO, Antonio Horta Azario at the time, took a leave of absence for 8 weeks, suffering from workplace stress. The reason I'm making that point is it's somebody else. This is the CEO of a major worldwide bank talking about stress. I don't know his salary at the time, but I'm sure he was earning millions of pounds. And the point I want to make is that money doesn't buy you happiness. I know it's a famous phrase. I think money, what it does is it affords you luxuries, it affords you certain freedoms, it removes one potential area of anxiety, but it's just one part of people's lives. And when people are on their deathbed, they're not talking about money, they're talking about family and worth and health, obviously, especially if you're on your deathbed.
Yeah, but you'd rather be stressed and rich, wouldn't you, than stressed and poor?
But remember what I said, money does buy you certain advantages in life, but it's not all about that. To tell you a bit about myself, I sometimes think about what are the things that are important to me. They're family, they're my job, they're my health, and they're my friendship circles. Money is not part of that. Now, of course, your job generates money. That's my values. But the point I want to make is twofold. One is it's not all about money. There are so many other things that go into creating happiness. So if you're Xavi, he might be earning millions of pounds. If you're Jurgen Klopp, he might be earning millions of pounds, but they've got other struggles that are common to lots of people. Don't know about their love life. I don't know about their family. But if you're lonely, it probably doesn't matter how much money you have, you're going to feel lonely. You see examples of this in so many industries where people at the top, you think, because I think we can be shallow as commentators at times, you think they're happy because they've got lots of money, but you can see that they're not necessarily happy because they're lots of money. Money doesn't buy you happiness.
And power doesn't necessarily buy you happiness. I mean, this is something that was explored, I think, very well, Harriet in The Crown. I don't know if you're watching that, but that was kind of all about how the Prime Minister only had the Queen to talk to, but that was a really important outlet, and who did she have to talk to? Because everyone wants to refer up to someone, whatever amount of power you have.
Yeah, and I think that there's a really good piece in The Economist, actually, about Jurgen Klopp and the demands of energy and also the loneliness of being at the top and feeling like everyone depends on you and you're constantly criticised. I mean, Xavi said, whatever I do, there's criticism. Guy, you say that you don't know much about Xavi's family life. Well, he has 2 small children. I mean, I wonder how much he sees of them. Do you know what I mean? He's got a daughter and a little boy, and he probably doesn't see any of their football games on the weekend. It's the question of whether or not money buys happiness. I think this is a really interesting story, and I think that Guy is kind of not telling the full story here, because the studies about whether or not money buys happiness were actually pretty contradictory until last year. This was actually, it was really interesting. So I'm just going to quickly potted history of these 2 really big studies. Firstly, in 2010, a Nobel Prize winning economist and psychologist called Daniel Kahneman and Princeton University's Angus Deaton published this study that showed that emotional well-being, by every metric that we have, emotional well-being does rise with income, but not beyond $75,000.
Oh, I'm so glad there's a figure to take home to the bar tonight.
There was. Then
$75,000. That's what I need to be aiming at, is it? Okay.
Well, adjust it for inflation, so we'll get to that. But then in 2021, this other guy, Matthew Killingsworth, who's a happiness researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, he found that in 2021, happiness doesn't plateau after 75,000, and actually well-being could continue to rise up to 200,000. So this is my favorite bit of this story. Is last year these 2 got together in what they called an adversarial collaboration with Barbara Mellers from the Penn Integrates Knowledge University as an arbiter. And the 3 of them got together and brought out this big study last year to kind of settle the debate once and for all. And this paper showed that on average, larger incomes were associated with increasing levels of happiness. But within that trend, unhappy people of any income bracket, they had a sharp rise of happiness up to 100,000 and then it stopped. And they said that what it showed is that people who are well off but unhappy, more money doesn't help. That if you're rich and miserable, it doesn't matter how much more you earn, it doesn't make you happier.
Well, maybe it just depends where the tax thresholds kick in.
Yeah, and this was all adjusted for inflation. So I think this is really, really interesting because it does show that actually money does buy happiness in terms of security, freedom from homelessness, freedom from the threat of bankruptcy. It buys you the resources to have a family. It buys you the resources to have circles of friends. It buys you the security to enjoy the things that make you happy. But the things that actually, if you lose those things, when you, like we've seen with the football managers, then that's where the happiness disappears.
I think, Harriet, we're actually agreeing with each other because, as I said, money does buy you things that you potentially wouldn't have without that money. But the human psyche and emotions goes beyond the things we were just talking about. Love, loneliness, friendship. Money is less likely to touch those, let's say. I'm also dubious about studies that say they solve every single problem going, because I don't think any study's ever done that.
Yeah, I mean, they're problematic, but I think there are also a lot of studies that show that if you work extremely long hours and you don't see your family and your friends and you don't exercise, you don't have rest or respite, then your happiness levels massively decrease.
Okay, but for someone like Xavi Hernandez, Arion, he wasn't the manager of Barcelona when he took that job just for money. That job comes with a lot of money. He wanted that job because of ambition. And if he didn't take that job because he thought, oh no, it looks really stressful and I'm going to have a miserable time and I'll be leaving in however many months' time, then he'd have always been wondering for all of his life, oh, but I could have been the manager of Barcelona and I never gave it a shot. That comes with a well-being cost as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Xavi and frankly all football managers would do well to read the work of the economist Steven Zemansky from the University of Michigan. He wrote a book called Soccernomics, and one of the big findings from it was that basically managers don't make an enormous difference to the outcomes of teams' performances over the course of a season. The biggest thing that determines results is in fact the players' wages, and whatever the wages are, if they're higher, then the team does better, and if the players' wages are lower, then the team does less well. And that's because obviously with higher wages you can attract better talent. And the reality is, according to Zemansky, that managers could easily be replaced, he said, by stuffed dolls or their secretaries or underlings, and you'd get the exact same results in direct accordance with players' wages. So I think that all managers need to just relax, realize that they're essentially a little bit superfluous. They're big names, they've got great celebrity, they've got great wages, and they should just shut up.
Oh no, my phone's ringing. Sorry, I was just about to do something. But look, it just shows how busy I am, and yet I'm able to put in this excellent performance with all that stress. My wife's calling now. I've got so much going on. My thanks to Arion, Harriet, and Guy. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tap follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. I'll talk to you in a minute. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer was Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio, a man with lots going on in his life. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.